Welcome to the threshold of the weekend, the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, with our eyes still on Normandy. A day after we mark the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, President Biden was back today at Pointe du Hoc, the same spot, as I read on the terminal, etched in the nation's political memory in 1984. That's when Ronald Reagan stood in that same spot delivering his famous Boys of Pointe du Hoc speech, drawing common cause between their feet in the face of Nazi Germany's tyranny, to then the Cold War, and now today Joe Biden connecting the dots to aggression from Vladimir Putin, referring as well to Donald Trump without mentioning his name over the past 2 days. We assemble our panel for their take on this. Jeannie Shanzino is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor, of course, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Matt Gorman is here too, Republican strategist and executive VP at Targeted Victory. Great to have you both here. Matt, what's it like as a Republican to hear the Democratic president channel the former Republican president Ronald Reagan, who so many Republicans cite in their arguments and their justifications for policies? A lot of folks have seen the Republican Party move away from that establishment view to one closer to isolationism. What did you make of Joe Biden's speech today?
Couple things. I don't think it was a very smart political ploy to raise expectations galactically before the speech and say that your speech today will evoke comparisons of, I believe, one of the greatest speeches of one of the greatest communicators we've ever had in the presidency. I think it did Biden a disservice to raise the bar that high. Number one. Number two, look, I revere Reagan. I do. I think he was one of the greatest presidents, especially of the 20th century. But I think what's tough, and we talked about this earlier, when you're trying to appeal to younger voters, invoking a president who gave a speech that is further away from present day than when he gave it to D-Day. It was a long time ago. And so it's tough to resonate when you're comparing yourself to a figure that many folks don't have that historical touch point for.
Boy, that's incredible. Great perspective on the timeline there, Jeannie. We talked about this a bit yesterday. There was more, of course, than Ronald Reagan. You might have seen this, by the way, or heard this as a very different speech. Was the White House correct to kind of frame it that way to begin with, to Matt's point, raise expectations?
No, absolutely not. Listen, Joe, I may want to, repeat Mary Lou Retton's Vault or something, but, well, I couldn't do it either way. But why would you set yourself up for that? Listen, Ronald Reagan's speech was given at a particular place in a particular time, and it was such a different media environment that a speech like that could raise your numbers and help you win the presidency, again, as it did with Ronald Reagan. But we're in a very different media environment, and you don't want to set yourself up for a repeat because, of course, all you can do is fall short in people's eyes. Was it a good speech? Absolutely. It was fine. The message is right. The time is incredibly different. So for that reason, I think, the White House, I'm a bit surprised. I think some of the speechwriters are so keen on getting their important words heard that they raise these expectations, but it's problematic. The reality is, if Joe Biden wants to win this election, he's going to have to return to the issues people care about. He is trying. This is an important issue. Democracy around the world is under attack. We've known that for 2 decades. He's trying to make that case. But what is it at home? It's all about the economy. It's all about inflation. The things you just talked to Julie Su about, that's what it's about. And he's going to have to return here to win the election. So good speech, absolutely. Is it going to change the ball game? Absolutely not.
Well, I don't know, Matt. I think that moment when he put the aviators on while he was still at the podium before walking away might have done more for young people than the words that he delivered in some cases. But how about the actions made? $225 million in aid announced for Ukraine in a bilateral meeting with President Zelensky. They appeared together. They got the footage of them talking and meeting. Joe Biden even apologized to him for the delay in funding. Is that closer to what the commander-in-chief should be doing here as he's running for re-election?
In theory, yes. I mean, look, he is governing right now, and look, there is certainly parts of the Republican base that do not want Ukraine funding. The worldview is very different, but also it is broadly popular with independents and a large segment of Republicans. My old boss Tim Scott was supportive of funding for Ukraine in order to degrade the Russian military. And look, I will say, in his interview yesterday with David Muir of ABC News, Biden did make a good point. He did point out how much the Russian military has been degraded and the casualties suffered upon the Russian military. But I will say, I think to Jeannie's point, Ukraine and democracy writ large will not be winning issues for Biden in this election. If he wins this election, it's going to be because he was able to find a message on the economy and that abortion was able to at least match the salience that immigration does as a single issue motivating kind of point for voters. That's, I think, it's going to come down to at the end of the day.
It's interesting that we're still talking about money for Ukraine, Jeannie, after this massive supplemental request was passed. The president signed it into law. This $225 million shipment is actually a drawdown on U.S. supplies. As Ukraine waits for help here, it's going to take a long time to get some of that material to Ukraine. The meeting today important in helping that happen. Our European allies are also taking part in this now, and we're allowing Ukraine to use U.S.-made weapons, at least in some cases, near Kharkiv across the border against Russia. How long do you give the administration to widen that scope, even as they had warned over escalating this conflict with Russia?
Yeah, it seems to be a pattern with this war for the last 3 years that there is an ask,
Sure has.
there is a wait time, and then there is an approval. I think the real challenge here for the White House and for all of us, quite frankly, and for Ukraine, is it is still very unclear, at least in my mind, what is the end game here? What is success? How do you define that? And of course, Zelensky defines it in one way that the White House, at least heretofore, has not approved or agreed with. And until we know what the end game is, we are down a path where this thing is just going to stretch out. So Joe Biden may revisit allowing, U.S. Arms to be used in Russia in a more concerted way. But is that going to make a difference? I don't think so. And I think as it pertains to this issue at home, the Biden team is better off, leaving this to people like McConnell and Sullivan. The Republicans in the Senate did approve finally the spending. And we saw McConnell's editorial. I think that does more to speak to these middle, moderate, swing Republican voters who aren't that excited about Donald Trump in general, but specifically foreign policy wise and the isolationism, to bring them over. And so the Biden team has tried to reach out, and they continue to do that. But they're far better having Republicans reach out to Republicans than trying to have Joe Biden over there doing it. And I'm not saying that was the intent of the speech, but from a domestic standpoint, it's not going to have a lot of impact, within 24, 48 hours from where we are now.
Matt, the Daily Mail is reporting that, of all people, Steven Spielberg, who we saw in the crowd yesterday at the Normandy commemoration, helped to prepare Joe Biden for his speech today at Pointe du Hoc. He was in the room at the Hotel Intercontinental in Paris on Friday morning when the president was doing his final run-through, doing prep here for the speech on democracy. The White House did not apparently respond to inquiries about this, but what does that tell you about the optics the president's trying to employ here?
There's always this mutual fascination, Hollywood with politics, politics with Hollywood. Biden has done this before. He's brought in John Meacham to kind of ghostwrite, if you will, or at least advise a lot of his speeches. Look, I love, what Steven Spielberg did with Saving Private Ryan, producing Band of Brothers. Sure. He does bring a unique perspective to this. But I'm also, he's not much of a writer. So he's a director. So he can maybe advise in the cinematography, if you will, the scene that they're going to set. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really, I don't think, add much value to what Biden is doing. He's going to have to go up there and perform like he did today.
It's great to have both of you with us. A great panel on a Friday. Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Republican strategist. Matt Gorman from Targeted Victory. We thank you both. Have a great weekend. We'll pull them back together again on Monday here on the fastest show in politics.